We are weaving our lives. We are weaving our hearts and our minds. We are weaving the bright and dark threads of the journeys through these. We are
Welcome to the Sovereignty Time podcast. Join me in Circle, where we share the experiences of womanhood from the lens of radical self-responsibility, choosing bliss and ease over victimhood and struggle. I want to know how women are claiming sovereignty, manifesting their dream lives, and thriving in motherhood, partnership, health, and wealth. We are here to share vulnerable stories, encouraging each other as we weave the light and dark threads that create the messy but beautiful tapestries of our lives. Hello and welcome back to Sovereignty Time podcast. I am Hannah Rose Giove, your hostess. Today I'm going to be sharing my own birth stories. I am so excited. I have two so far, and I have a special announcement. Is that baby number 3 is coming July 2025. I am super excited, and it has been quite the journey to get here. Believe me. Oh my goodness. I cannot wait to share what's been going on in my life, especially just this last year. It's been such a portal of deep, deep, just excavation and vulnerability and getting radically honest with myself and my partner and really starting to show up differently, starting to shift and starting to grow more. And yeah, really excited for that. And then one of the things that's come out of all of this is a new baby. So I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. So yeah, very exciting. First, before I start, I just want to do a little grounding exercise, and I would love to be making a habit of doing this on our podcast here because I love it, and I love women's circles, and that's two of my favorite things is grounding practices and kind of a how are you doing check-in, because I feel like we don't get enough of that nowadays in our busy society. So I'm going to do a little drumming and just some breathing, just a really short check-in. And you're, of course, welcome to join me wherever you are. Just go ahead and take some more intentional, deeper breaths. Release with the open exhale. Just warming up my drum here. Some more inhales. So when you're breathing in, just at the top, hold it for a second. And when you release, just release all of that stress and the to-do list and whatever is going on. Just try to let it go with your exhales. The rhythm of the drum just brings us back to the rhythm of life, the heartbeat. It's ancient. The drum was probably one of the first instruments. Just try to ground yourself in your body. Feel the earth through the floor. Put your hand on your heart. Bring yourself back to center. Thank you, drum. Thank you, deer. Deer hide. The medicine of the deer. And you know what? Just a little check-in. So I'm 6 weeks pregnant right now, and I just announced it to my close family, and we haven't even really announced it like on social media yet. So we're gonna do that really soon. And this pregnancy has been different, so different. Oh my gosh. With all my other pregnancies, I was nauseous, very nauseous from the very beginning. Not the whole pregnancy, just the first trimester, thankfully. And this one is different. I am not nauseous at all. I am extremely hungry all the time, and I can smell everything so much. I'm sure I could in my other pregnancies too, but that was actually one of the first things I noticed before I knew I was pregnant. And I even had the thought in my mind, oh my gosh, that's interesting. I can smell a lot right now. Interesting. And then um other things, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I've gained a tiny bit of weight already, which is fine. But just being so tired. I do not remember being this tired before. Just it's taking a lot out of me, my energy levels. So I'm really having to work at being active, and that is a big goal for me. So it will give me more energy, and that is what I'm going to be working on. But whew, so tired and just not sleeping great. But I really think if once I get more in a consistent routine with exercise, that I will have a little bit more better sleep. And then, yeah, being more rested and have more energy. So that's my little check in. And yeah, so my birth stories. We really have to go back to my mom's birth, like how she birthed me and my siblings, my story of my own birth, which my mother had 2 boys before she had me, and then she had 3 more after me. So just a short little glimpse into what happened for her. Her first baby was born in 1980 in Santa Barbara in a notorious hospital. Like, they did not allow VBACs for, I don't even know if they do right now, honestly. Very notorious. And so she gave birth there and ended up, first time mom in her 20s, ended up with an emergency C-section, classic story. We will never know the truth of what happened with that. If it was one of the classic, the hospital really just caused the emergency. Because as a lot of us know that are interested in free birth, birth functions best left alone and undisturbed. So when you have a hospital birth, that is not what happens. So she ended up with emergency C-section. My next brother, she had a planned cesarean, of course, because VBACing is so dangerous. Oh my goodness. And after that, she knew she wanted to have more babies. She was a very devout Christian, and she started to question the system. Why am I going to have C-sections for all of the rest of my children? This doesn't really make sense to me. And I believe that God created our bodies and that they should be functioning to birth the children that we are creating, that type of thing. So she started doing research. She got pregnant with me, and she found through her own work of digging, found a book called The Silent Knife, which was written in the 80s by a midwife. And it's all about the treacherous hospital births and all about VBAC and how you can have one safely and how to advocate for yourself and all kinds of different things. So there's been information out there for a long time. If people want to find it, it is out there. So she started educating herself, and she actually had to change her insurance because her Kaiser insurance at the time when she was pregnant with me wouldn't even cover a doctor or hospital that would be able to facilitate quote unquote VBAC. And VBAC, as most of us know, is vaginal birth after cesarean. So she'd had 2 cesareans and she wanted to have a vaginal birth. So this is a radical idea at that time in the 80s. Okay. It was just becoming more possible because it was so common to hear once a cesarean, always a cesarean. And the truth of the matter is that is still very much alive and true today, even though they want you to believe something else. They want to tell people, oh, yeah, you can have a VBAC. But really, that is not necessarily what they really want. And it's not what most people get. So she's going down this path, and she finds a doctor in a different city that will support her. And so she has to drive to a different city when she's in labor with me, has a successful VBAC in the hospital. And so I'm kind of like, part of my story is this: I'm this warrior baby. My mom had to fight in order to have a vaginal birth with me. And so I have this kind of birth warrior spirit built into me. And it it's pretty apparent because I have 5 siblings and I'm the only one so far that has had home births and or free birth. So it's not like just because your mom had an experience, the children are gonna learn from that or follow in the footsteps of that. So essentially, my next sister after me, she had another hospital VBAC, and then after that, she had 2 home births, and she had to really work hard to get a midwife because she didn't have a lot of money at the time. And so she did work trade and things of that nature. But and so another thing is that I have some of her journal entries, and she actually knew women that had had free births. But what she said was she knew that my dad would essentially not be capable of supporting her through that. And not that he wouldn't allow it, just that she wouldn't feel safe being unsupported by other people and having him be unsupported. And this is a dynamic that is very prevalent. And there's, I think, a couple different things. Either it's one, the husband or partner is just is like against it, like absolutely not, or they might be kind of more open to it. But it kind of did happen to me too, where the woman still kind of doubts the capacity of the man to be the essentially the rock, the supporter, the person that's confident and secure going through this experience. So that is something that is, I hope that that continues to improve as women are more vulnerable about their desires and their need for their partners to show up in this space and in this experience. So that's my little synopsis of my mom's experiences. So when I got pregnant, I was 29 years old. My partner and I had been together for 5 years, and I was very much like, I even said, "I want a cat or a baby." I just was really feeling the call, and, uh, essentially, I had been on birth control, I got off of it. It took about 8 months, but we weren't trying super hard. It was kind of, it just happened when it happened, and it was funny because I got pregnant the same cycle month that one of my sister-in-laws did, and she ended up with twins, so she gave birth a little bit earlier, but that was fun to have that shared experience. But I was immediately knew I wanted to have a home birth for sure, and I didn't know a lot about home birth back then. I have After giving birth the first time, I eventually became a doula and I thought about becoming a midwife. But before giving birth the first time, I all I really knew was my mom's experience. I didn't know. I just knew I didn't want to give birth in a hospital. I didn't know all the stories of traumatic hospital birth. I didn't really know a lot. I knew that a lot of women were having C-sections. I knew a third of my friends were having C-sections, but I was like, "Yeah, I don't wanna risk that happening to me," but I just didn't know a lot about home birth or the about licensed midwives versus an unlicensed midwife, or a lot of the politics that I know now about the birth world, I knew nothing. So, essentially, we interviewed a couple different midwives, and we found some that we liked, and it was a team of 2, and really sweet women. Definitely a great alternative to some of the other ones in the area, and we just felt good with them, felt like they were down to earth, kind of funny, just, around our age-ish, maybe a little bit older experience, and it feels nice to have that wise woman to walk alongside you with in this experience you've never been through before. And I didn't know too much about Freebirth at that time. A funny part of it was I had stumbled across Freebirth Society podcast at one point, maybe a year or 2 before I got pregnant, and I remember the one story that I listened to of the woman that had a sabotaged, kinda semi-sabotaged home birth in Sweden, and then she went on to give birth in Mexico to her second baby, a free birth. And even though I heard that story, I must have just deep down mentally been like, "That's just not for me. I'm not ready for that. I'm just gonna do what my mom did and go with the midwife." And I felt comfortable with that, and my husband did too. He was 100% on board for sure. He's doesn't super love the hospital, medical, big pharma, all that kind of thing. So he was very excited about it. And I remember prepping for that birth. I did some really cute affirmation cards and just really worked on, like I can do anything. The only way out is through. All those kind of positive messages into my psyche. And I did not hire a doula. And I really didn't know that about doulas or what the difference was between a midwife and a doula. But fast forwarding to the day that I went into labor, I there was a little kind of wishy-washy with my due date. The original one was the 3rd. No, was it the 3rd or the 4th of July? But then they changed it to the 7th just to give me a few more days. And so it was the 3rd of July, and I was thinking, "Oh, like, yeah, I'm full term, but, like, it might not happen," I was kind of in denial, and we were gonna go to a little 4th of July party, and I made twice baked potatoes, which is kind of a lot of work, so that was my, like, energy. I forget what people call it, nesting, or yeah, you just get this burst of energy right before you go into labor. So, we go to the party, and I was the only person in the backyard in the pool, and the sun was going down, and I found a little floaty, and I was just floating around by myself in the pool, and I just love that feeling of buoyancy when you're just kind of like you're flying or floating. It's just amazing, taking all the pressure off of everything. And this just little magical moment all by myself with the sun was going down. And then sure enough, a couple hours later, I went to the bathroom and was leaking. My fluid was leaking a little bit. And I was a little confused at first, like, did I pee? What is this? And so I told my husband after it happened a couple times, and we decided we should just let the midwives know. So we called them, and whichever one I talked to, she said, okay, typically when this happens, you're going to give birth within 24 hours. And that might not be true for everybody, but it's been true for both of my births so far. So we're at the party and my husband had been drinking, and I was thinking, I don't want to drive home because we were a good 45 minutes, 50 minutes from our house. And I was like, what if my labor starts or my water breaks and I'm driving? I don't know if I want to risk that. So we called his parents and they were like, okay, yeah, we can come pick you up. But they were also at a party somewhere out in the boonies. And so they were quite a ways away from us. And so I just spent the next couple hours hanging out. I remember being on the couch, putting a towel down, and I had a couple snacks. And they finally got there and we got home, I think around midnight. And I remember being in the car and feeling little contractions, like it was starting to be a little bit more rhythmic. So I had actually invited my mother-in-law to my birth because, I love her, of course, but my mom passed when I was 24, and at that time I was 30. So my mom had been gone for 6 years, and I just was wanting that motherly presence there. And I also I didn't know what to expect either. It was my first birth. And so I invited her. And so they decided to kind of just spend the night since she was invited anyways. And I waited to call the midwives until I was in active labor. And essentially my husband went to sleep and I couldn't go to sleep. And that's what they had said, try to get some sleep, rest. I could not sleep. The contractions were just progressively, slowly getting more intense, more close together. And I remember kind of laying on my side, and then I would kind of pace back and forth a little here and there, or kind of sit on my birth ball. And then once it started to get more intense, and I finally had got in the shower, and I think it was around 4 in the morning. And my husband woke up and we finally were going to try to call the midwives and just let them know it was getting more intense. And we were we needed to page them because I don't think either answered their phone. So we're like, how do you page someone? Just being kind of confused. And also, like, trying to time your contractions is the most confusing thing if you're not used to it. So I remember those couple things. And I was just in the shower with my yoga ball, and we got the midwife on the phone, and they were kind of trying to assess where I was, and I was having a hard time talking at that point. And so they decided they were going to come, and they didn't get there till 5:30, I think. And I think around that time is when my father-in-law actually started setting up the birth pool, which I hadn't even thought about. That had totally gone out the window. I was in my bedroom this whole time. And he started to set that up. They get there and I'm like transitioning pretty much because I ended up giving birth at 7:37 in the morning. They got there about 5:30. So they were there for 2 hours. So that was pretty much transition. Like those next 2 hours were rocking my world for sure. I was vocalizing a lot, not like screaming, but I ended up toward the end especially doing this oming thing, which I loved so much because it felt like the vibration was taking the pressure off in between my cells, like amazing. I highly recommend it. But because we already had my son's name, which is Iam, Iam, IAM. And so I was saying Iam. So it was this oming. And that is just, I swear, it felt better than even counter pressure or anything like that. So I was okay. The other part of this is then I called, or my husband called my sisters because I had invited them. My one sister ended up taking like photos and the video of the birth, which we hadn't even planned, but I was grateful for that. And she was totally calm. The younger one, she was just kind of staying out of the way with the camera. And then my other sister, the middle one, she was doing a little bit like trying to kind of hold my leg, or Matt was holding my hand, and I was very much with my husband, really kind of, he was my anchor, and my mother-in-law was standing there giving me sips of water. So I was just like eye to eye with my husband, like, just getting through each contraction. And he's like, "You can do this, babe. You got this. You're rocking this." And then so the other sister was kind of just there, like trying to help. And at, so there's a lot of people, you guys. I would say that there were too many people, and I don't regret it. It's just a learning lesson. There were like 8 people in the room because we had a 2 midwife team and their apprentice. And I was aware that they had an apprentice, and I met her and everything. But these are some of the things you got to think about when it starts to add up, the number of people. And because everybody's energies are in the room. So at one point, when he was crowning, my sister kind of started to freak out a little bit, the one that was helping. And my midwife had to be like, "Okay, everybody, everyone breathe. It is okay. We need to keep the energy calm." And so I'm grateful for that kind of, let's monitor the container, everyone. All right. You're not giving birth. The birthing woman is giving birth right now. And yes, it is intense, but everything's going to be okay. So that was just a cute moment, honestly. But I I felt I felt pretty disembodied with this birth. I didn't want to feel his head. I was kind of like, just get me done. Get this over with. I want to be done. And I kept saying, like, "Do you see his head? Like, is this over yet?" And I was just vocalizing so much. I lost my voice after that too. And I was I wasn't definitely wasn't surrendering. I wasn't softening. I wasn't kind of working with. It was a little bit more tension and kind of fighting against, and like just wishing it to be over. And that is something I definitely learned for my next birth, was that's not how I wanted to approach birth moving forward. And just kind of also, you're outsourcing a little bit to the midwives, and it's just like, here you go, like, you just help me through this, and you tell me it's going to be okay, and you're the expert here, type thing. So this is what happened. I was having the fetal ejection reflex, and I I remember specifically actually trying not to push as hard as my body was pushing, because I was thinking, like, I don't want to tear. So even though I was thinking this is really intense and I want it to be over with, I was really at that moment trying to go slow, trying to kind of work with my body in those last couple of contractions where he was crowning. And I remember the other midwife, she had the fetal Doppler on me like so much of the time, which kind of hurts. And I wasn't super excited about that. And she seemed like a little worried to me. And what they ended up telling me was, all right, we need you to push this baby out now. We need to get this baby out. And that was definitely going against my intuition for sure, because as I said, I was trying to go slow. And essentially what ended up happening was he had a nuchal hand, which is the hand up and the fist up on the side of the head. And the midwife actually stuck her hand inside me and pulled him out or pulled the hand down or whatever she did. I definitely tore. And it's really hard going to try to assess and say, was that necessary? Was it not necessary? It's really hard to know, but what I believe is that birth really functions best undisturbed. And if you are working with your baby and hey, you might need to change positions, you might need to do runner's lunge, you might need to get up and walk around, you know, you might need to use gravity. I was kind of on my back. I was in a semi-reclined on my back position, and I did actually move to hands and knees at one point, but it did make my contractions slow down a little bit. So they were like, I don't know, you were progressing fine the way you were, which of course being on your back is more convenient for them. And I'm not trying to say, midwives are only out for convenience for themselves by any means, but at the same time, I do feel that there's a way for a woman to be able to work with her baby if you're feeling like the baby's not coming out and there's a need for that. I mean, change positions. Start with the most natural method first. So that's my belief, because for both of my births, I tore and sex was painful for over 6 months. And I know that that's not true for a lot of women. So, and another thing too is when you're sutured like I was in my first birth, that healed skin is tighter than it naturally would be. And I believe that's why I tore in my second birth was in the spot where I was sutured. So it's not like the end of the world or something, and I just think that it's an important note to make, and that was my experience. So he came out, he was crying. I was like, thank God that that's over. And I still never would have gone back and wanted to have a hospital birth. No. I definitely had a good experience and then moved on from that and had a free birth. So I was, really proud of myself, and I was in general happy with the experience. I think just learning more over time about the best possible option is for birth to be undisturbed in general. A little side note I wanted to make about, inviting my sisters. Like I said, I wouldn't go back and change it, but one of my thoughts around inviting my sisters was, they'll get to see this home birth because neither of them had given birth yet. And yeah, just this idealism. And I would almost call it like birth saviorism, which is not technically a term, but this thought that, oh, if people experience home birth, then maybe they'll want to do that for themselves, or they'll feel like that's what would be great for them. And that is not true in my experience. And it's really better to have less energies in the room, less people to manage, less people to be worried about. And neither of my sisters were converted to home birth, okay? One of them has had hospital births and the other one hasn't given birth yet. They have their own beliefs and opinions, and that's totally fine. And that's the thing about birth, is that people are going to come to their realizations when they're ready. And lots of women love hospital birth. Lots of women love midwives, and that's great. And that if that works for you, then great. But we are here. I'm here to just tell stories of what's possible outside of that. So another lesson is just with touching back on midwifery. I feel like for me, the feeling that I got from it was I'm outsourcing my power. I'm giving them the say. They are the experts in the room. And even though I had a pretty good, what happens sometimes is that a midwife can decide that she doesn't like how things are going and recommend that you be transferred to the hospital or any number of things of that kind of trajectory. And sometimes looking back, there might be questions of was that necessary? So that's just something that I like to keep in mind and have people be aware of, because there's benefits and risks of everything in life. Really, how am I taking responsibility? What level of responsibility am I taking on myself for the birth of this child, for the health and safety of this child? Am I giving that responsibility to someone else? That's essentially what you're doing when you hire someone. And the thing too is that there's no guarantees. Just because you hire an OBGYN or a midwife or whoever doesn't mean that you're always going to have a great outcome. There's just no guarantees in life. So anything could happen. And so I decided for my next pregnancy that I wanted to free birth, and really just being inspired by the stories of other women, and really being inspired by the fact that the baby didn't need help getting in. So my belief is that the baby doesn't need help getting out. I can work with the baby and we can work together, and I am the absolute authority on the situation, and I can trust my intuition that if I feel that there's a problem, I can then go and get medical attention if necessary. So, and that's not something I'm against, but it's something that I'm willing to put that level of responsibility on myself, because I'm choosing to bring this baby into the world and be its mother. And that's just how I want to be presenting myself. And it really is this, in my opinion, a level of radical self-responsibility that has begun to shift my entire world. Because if I'm going to have that level of self-responsibility for birth, what am I doing with the rest of my life? What am I doing in terms of my relationship? What am I doing in terms of my money situation? In terms of how I'm bringing my gifts to the world? So it's a really powerful thing. And that's where I come to this place of, so you had a free birth. Now what? You know? And I love hearing free birth stories, but I also want to hear stories of how has this impacted your life on a deeper, wider ripple effect. Okay, so moving on to my second pregnancy and birth. We waited a while, 4 years. It was a good 3 years before I was even ready to start contemplating another baby. It was a big shift for me, made into mother. It was big. I actually even wrote a song called Maiden Mother, and which I will definitely be sharing. And just a big shift. I was a stay-at-home mom. My husband was working a lot, and I felt like I needed more support than I asked for, and felt a little overwhelmed. And it's just a big transition. Didn't really do a whole lot I had some friends with babies and my sister-in-law, but I think I just needed a little bit more than I had as far as like community and just really feeling more nourished in that big life transition. So 3 years before I even started thinking about having another baby, at first I was like, oh no, I'm good. I'm good with one baby. Because, pregnancy and birth is one thing, but then mothering and toddlerhood woo, okay. And our breastfeeding journey started out really rocky. Right. So decided to start opening our energetic fields up for another little being. But it took us a while to get things in line. We made a decision with a work project about 8 months before I conceived, and it was not in service to having another baby. Our relationship was having a hard time, and we got some counseling, which was really amazing, learned imago dialogue, which pretty much saved our relationship. And then we had to we got pregnant and then had to pretty much restructure a huge work agreement, lost a lot of money because we needed a place to live essentially, where we had originally thought that there was going to be a place to live, but that didn't work out. And so it was such a big necessity because we were going to have a baby that we had to make huge pivots. So that was really hard. So we got a new place. I was a couple months pregnant. And so I spent a bunch of time just setting the house up and nesting and doing all the things. At the beginning of the pregnancy, I was like, all right, I'm pretty sure I want a free birth, but let me just do a little bit of research. I kind of was looking around for sovereign birth support, like an unlicensed midwife, or maybe a retired midwife, maybe a birth keeper type thing, a doula that's more outside the system, more like actively assisting women with their free births. And I did talk to little couple people, but nothing really vibed with me. And I just ended up deciding I'm going to invite this girlfriend that I have that's an herbalist. And she actually was living right next to us at the time. And they had a little son the same age as my 4-year-old. So it just felt really in flow and natural. And there was also this element of it too, where I was being pretty protective with this decision to free birth because it being my first free birth, and I had even gotten a little pushback before about having a home birth. There's a couple people that shared the horror stories with me and kind of like, are you sure home birth is what you want to do? So I was wary with who I was sharing with about my free birth. And I think so you got to protect yourself. And it's not about lying or shaming or anything like that. It's just that there's a lot of fear out there and people project onto pregnant women, and it's really sad and it's not appropriate. So do whatever you need to do to protect yourself if you want to have a free birth. But now going into my second free birth, I'm excited because I feel a lot more confident and I could be a lot more open about it now. Whereas the first time going through, it was kind of like walking on eggshells a little bit with family and yeah, I feel a lot better about it now, fortunately. So I had just this amazing before I had been going to my prenatals and everything with my first baby with the midwives. And this pregnancy, it was so fun because I didn't have to do that. And it felt like this huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. And I just spent my time doing other things and other ways of nourishing myself and creating community for myself. My husband and I did the complete guide to free birth through Freebirth Society, which we really enjoyed and I would recommend it. And I did some like community prenatal village gatherings. I had one at my house, hosted one, and then I went to another one in my small town. And I was like making connections through Freebirth Society. And then I went to a Beltane women's like song circle retreat. I was 6 months pregnant, I think, and maybe 7. But it was so magical, like taking that time for myself, taking time away from my family, my 4-year-old and all the responsibilities of motherhood and just really being able to like rest and enjoy the company of other women. And then another fun thing I did was I went camping with the girlfriend I had invited to my birth, her and her little boy. And so it was like the four of us, our two little boys. And then I was 8 months pregnant at the time, which was so funny, but I'm an Aries, so I'm like, I got this. I'm just like, action, let's do this. Our husbands were actually off on their little solo husbands before the baby comes trip. And so that camping trip was so cute. It was right next to the river, and we just made food. We just hung out in the water all day and floated on the rafts, and just my belly was starting to drop, and it was just so nice to be out in the sun and next to the water. And then one other thing we did, we took a little trip as a family, the three of us, before our last little trip together as a family before the new baby, which I recommend that. It's such a sweet little thing to do. And then, so I had an estimated due date just from based online, and my that's the other thing. My due date for my second baby was literally the same as my first son, and we didn't know the sex either. That was super fun for it to be a surprise. But I conceived them both in the same cycle, 5 years, or is it 4 years apart? You know, but they were born, they are technically almost exactly 5 years apart. So what ended up happening was 2 weeks before my estimated due date, I woke up in the morning and my water started leaking. And we had this birthday party planned for my son who was turning 5, and it was kind of a big-ish birthday party. It was going to be at a park, and we were going to barbecue, and I feel like we made it bigger than it needed to be, but I feel like we should have just done it easier, like ordered pizzas or something, it was too much on us. So what happened was, I went and told my husband, "Hey, my water's leaking." And he was like, "What? Oh my God, no, it's too early. We still have 2 more weeks." And I was just like, "I don't know what to tell you, babe. It could happen today." And he was very shocked. He just was not prepared. And so that part of it was hard. And that was part of the lessons that we both learned from that birth. So he was stressing out, and I I was in the kitchen at one point, and he comes in and he's like, "What are we going to do about the birthday party? And, should we cancel it? Should we call?" Like, and I was just like, "Babe, we're not going to do anything right now. We're just going to wait until afterwards and then go from there." And he was getting kind of hyphy, and I was like, "Whoa, you're not the one that's going to push out a baby today." I said it with like this attitude. And so he's just kind of, we went our separate ways, and I was just cleaning up the house because we had been camping and all these different things. And so I was like wanting to have a clean home. And I texted my girlfriend, the one that was going to come over, and I'm just like, "Can you please help with Matt? He's stressing out." And she did come over, and she did have some words with him, but it did not really help him. It was, you can't outsource that kind of thing. Like, okay, I felt like it was almost this crazy level of self-sabotage where it was like this feeling of, my husband is not going to be like, I need to have support in order to help support him. And weirdly, the universe just created this situation where that came true. So it's like my story was coming true that I was telling myself. So what ended up happening was I think she left and then I don't remember exactly how it happened, but either I was laying on the bed or he was laying on the bed or I was laying there. I said, "Oh, come lay next to me, babe." And he was still, having a hard time. And I ended up spooning him and just being like, "Babe, we got this. Like, just breathe. Everything's going to be okay." And I just really had to drop into my soft confidence in us, in the baby, in the situation, in the birthday, and just be strong. And even though I wanted that from him, I had to first step into that myself. And honestly, now going into this second free birth together, that lesson, in addition to a lot of other work that we are doing as a couple, is just making us stronger and a better team. And I think he is going to be a stronger rock for me this next time. And that's definitely a goal of his. And both learned a lot from that first kind of just being in shock and like, oh my God, what's going on? And I mean, yeah, I would say like, don't overcommit around your expected due date, but even if you have commitments, just being flexible. Like, we're going to do what works for us. If this baby comes and there's something planned afterwards, just being in that flow and giving yourselves the grace. So it was about noon. I woke up at 8. About noon, I went up to my room and had my heating pad. I had a little birth altar, candles. I was listening to some music, some birth affirmations, and that's about like, about noon is when I started to have contractions. And they just progressively got more and more intense, really similar to my first birth. And at 4 o'clock is when it started to really get intense. All the other stuff leading up to that, I was like, I could totally handle this. I got this. And then at that point, and so my husband and my girlfriend had been just checking in on me. I was nice. Like I liked being alone, but they were checking in on me. I was drinking coconut water and I think I might have had some light snacks. I can't remember. But 4 o'clock, I was like, okay, I want to get into the bathtub. This is getting intense. Into the bathtub. And it was about an hour in the bathtub, and they were both in the bathroom with me. And yeah, transition in the bathtub. And that hour again definitely rocked me, but it was so much different this time. And I was really working with my body to surrender into every wave or contraction, just wanting to open and soften, which was so much different than my first birth. And just, going through it one breath at a time, one contraction at a time. And it actually did get to this almost sensual experience where I said at one point something like, I can't remember my exact words, but it was like, fuck yeah, like bring it. Like, you think I can't open anymore? Like, I got this type thing. I wish I could remember what I said. My husband is still like, I don't remember you saying that. It's like, no, I definitely said something like this. Where it was just like, I was just like in spiritual communion with my body and with the baby, and just like, we are opening, we are here, we're doing this work, and I am surrendering. And so it felt like that it was this kind of, it was a sensual experience me. And people use the word blissful, and I think that I wouldn't call it pain. I honestly would not call it pain. It's it's a bodily sensation. You're having a bodily sensation that is moving your baby out of you. We've all been told that it's painful. What is pain anyways? I mean, it's all relative. So, it's all just what you wanna make it to be, you know? It's like, are tattoos painful? I mean, I don't know. There can be pleasure and pain. There can be it can mean many different things. So, that's what I would say. I feel like it's intense and they're bodily sensations and they're natural. So, and the more that I think for me, the more I was surrendering and softening and opening, the easier it becomes. And, also again doing my vocalizations. So, I had my hand down there and I was saying like slow baby slow, and he was crowning, and my husband didn't even think I was far along as I was. And at some point at one point I got a cramp in my leg and I had to switch positions in the bathtub. Giving birth in a standard bathtub is not ideal, but I like the water. I like the water on my belly, but you can't even cover your whole belly, but like the hot water on your contracting belly feels so good. And then just the water on your yoni feels good. But it was small, but I feel like the birth tub also has, I mean, it's like how do you keep the water hot, and it's like this whole ordeal. So I'm also kind of like, I don't know, maybe I'm not going to do water next time. The first birth, I forgot to tell you guys that my father-in-law had set up the birth tub and the midwives didn't want me to get into it because they were like concerned about the baby and they were wanting to listen to his heart rate the whole time. So they're like, no, you shouldn't get in the birth tub. And so like I didn't fight them on it because I was like already in transition. I was already so far gone. It's not like I'm gonna sit there and argue with someone. I was like, I could barely move anyways. So and the other thing too was the birth tub was not in my room. It was in the living room. And so I feel like I wouldn't have felt safe anyways. I needed to be like in that enclosed little area of my room. But anyways, going back to the bathtub thing, I don't know. I think I might just not do water next time because I feel like either way it's a little tricky. Anyways, so his head just comes out and my husband was kind of surprised, and then his body follows into the water, and I think at first my friend was kind of gonna like look like she was kind of grabbing the baby, but then my husband did, and I think he unwound the cord a little bit and then handed him to up to me, and my girlfriend was like, "Oh my god, it's a boy." And at first I didn't really register that, but later on, it took me a long time. Later on, I was like, "Oh man, that's kind of a bummer that she announced the sex." And I've heard this happens to other women too. I mean, Celia, whose birth stories I just heard about, even when your husband announces it, it can be a little disappointing. So, word to the wise out there. I know it's might not always be possible, but let your people know beforehand. Hey, it'd be nice if I could find out the gender first, the sex. I'm sorry, not the gender. Um, but all in all, it was an incredible experience. We eventually got out of the bathtub and then moved to my room, and fairly soon after kind of squatted and got the placenta out. We did burn the cord with some like wax candles, and my son helped my almost 5-year-old son, my husband. It was like a really sweet little moment. I wish we had like a picture or something, but that was sweet. And then the one other thing was my husband, because we have been talking about sushi, my husband left the house to go get sushi, and I intuitively was like, "I don't know about this." And instead, I was like, I couldn't think clearly. I just had a baby, and so I was like, "I guess so." I don't know why he didn't think or why I didn't think to send our friends and or to have them just make food because the sushi once he finally got home, it took, like, over an hour. I was just like, "Oh my gosh." I did not want him to be gone for that long or to be gone at all. So that was, like, another little lesson for me to really listen to my heart and my truth of, "No, I don't want you to leave right now. Who knows how long it's gonna take," but it's really hard to think clearly at that time. So, and it was disgusting. Oh my god. So gross. I needed, like, a warm home-cooked meal, not cold go sushi. I was like, "This is the worst thing ever." So, but I survived, and not gonna do that again. I think some just takeaways from my first free birth, the birth of my second son, Soul, who was born the day before the solstice, is just Ah, it really shined a light, not just on the situation of my husband being stressed out, but there were some things in pregnancy that came up too, and there were some stories I was telling myself that I I wasn't sure if my marriage was gonna be able to survive having a second baby. That was a deep, deep, dark story that I was telling myself, and that, essentially, that has been the biggest lesson for me is, like, if this is not how you want to show up yourself, if this is not how you want your husband to show up, what do you want? And how are you going to stand in your power and get clear and ask for it? So that's a journey that my husband have been on um subconsciously since that baby was born 2.5 years ago, but really more consciously for the entire last year. And that's what I want to share more about in the future in my process. Yeah, because it's been intense. Our marriage has been it's been in question, and we're really excited because things are really finally falling together after a lot of vulnerability, a lot of getting really honest and real with each other. So, and really excavating, looking at those stories, like the story I was telling myself that I didn't know if we could survive another kid. That's not a good story to be telling myself. And the beautiful thing is, at this point, going into a third pregnancy together, my feeling is that another child is bringing us closer together and strengthening our relationship and strengthening our family. So it's, yeah, an incredible, beautiful place to be in. I'm so grateful for all of the growth that's been occurring and for our futures together. And yeah. So that was a big piece of my learning lesson. It was really the veil was it's very thin in pregnancy and birth, and so I was just really seeing it was bringing me to my breaking point and seeing, wow, if this is something I say I want, like a healthy family, a healthy marriage, if I want to be the mother I say I want to be, and the woman I say I want to be, I've got to make some changes. So I really feel like free birth is a catalyst for growth. And yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah, I feel like just the last little lesson, listening to myself, speaking my truth, even with him going to sushi, just really being in tune with my intuition. That was a lesson. And just asking for the support I need, even if it might see, I'm like, I'm being needy. It's like, no, you're not. You deserve what you want. It's okay. And I think just being open to the fact that your birth time could happen at any moment, and just being really flexible and accepting of that. So I'm going to wrap up there, and it's been so fun to share these experiences with you, and can't wait to share my next birth story. Yay! And wow, it's been quite the journey. Hope you find value from these stories and confidence and inspiration. So thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will be back again next time. If you enjoyed this podcast, please support by subscribing, reviewing, downloading, and sharing with your friends. The intro song is Weaving Our Lives by Alexa Sunshine Rose.